Yes.
All right, thank you everyone for coming tonight. This is the Wallingford Library's event, George Washington Stop in Wallingford. My name is Rachel Taylor, and I'm the head of adult programming here at the Wallingford Public Library. And tonight we are very pleased and excited to welcome as our guest speaker, Ambassador Sichan, Deputy Assistant to President George H.W. Bush. Sichan is an avid student of the American Revolution and one of the few individuals to have read the original of George Washington's diary. Through his presentation this evening, Sichan will commemorate Washington's visit to our town as we prepare to celebrate the 258th anniversary of the occasion. I would like to apologize for the fact that our air conditioning units are not working currently. We just had a new HVAC system installed, and unfortunately it started malfunctioning earlier today. There are refreshments over at the side table, including seltzer. You are more than welcome to avail yourselves of them. There's also a water fountain upstairs and bathrooms right outside if you need a break. We'll also be keeping the back door open to help the rooms stay cool. So I'd like to extend a special thanks to the Wallingford Historic Preservation Trust for helping us coordinate this wonderful local history program. And now, here is Jerry Farrell Jr., President of the Trust, to introduce our speaker for the evening. Jerry?
Good evening. I'm Jerry Farrell Jr. I'm the President of the Wallingford Preservation Trust. The Trust is so pleased to work with the Public Library, the Historical Society, the Public Celebrations Committee. We have these several days commemorating Washington's visit in June of 1775. We hope you will come also on Saturday morning, that on Saturday morning it's not only Flag Day, but we're actually going to reenact these events. It starts at Town Hall at 10 o'clock. With Flag Day put on by the Wallingford Elks Lodge, and then it merges right into a walk of the whole trail that Washington took through the center of town. So we hope you can join us. That starts at 10 with Flag Day, at 11 with the reenactment. If it's not great weather, it's perhaps going to be inside at the town hall in the council chamber. So we'll go forward one way or the other, but we may be inside so we don't get all these fine gentlemen very wet. But as I say, it's great that we're having these events. I'm pleased to introduce Bob Beaumont, the president of the Wallingford Historical Society, my sometimes partner in crime.
Good evening all. I thank you all very much for coming. Welcome. It's my honor and pleasure to be able to introduce Sichan Sith. Sichan, from what I have read about Sichan, is a man who has spent most of his life, if you will, giving back, whether it's to his family, whether it's to his community, whether it's to his country, and now to his adopted country that he has been in for the last 49 years and 10 days. Oh, excuse me, I say 10 days. Well, excuse me, 49 years and 7 days. I'm sorry, I'm rushing, because 49 years and 7 days ago was his first day in Wallingford, Connecticut. But before we get to that, Sichan was college educated in Cambodia, born outside of Phnom Penh. Became a teacher. Back in 1974, I believe it was, he ended up starting to work for CARE. That would be the Cooperative Relief Everywhere. You've heard of CARE packages. Well, this is the organization that he worked for in Cambodia, helping people in Cambodia and who were about to be invaded by the Khmer Rouge or the communist Cambodians. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of the likes of Pol Pot and the killing fields of Cambodia. This gentleman is the sole survivor of his family. And one of the reasons that he was given the opportunity by the local head of the U.S. Agency for International Development to leave Cambodia at 12 p.m. one day. He was told, look, you've got to be back here within an hour. It's a drop-dead time. Sichan had a meeting that day, and he felt the responsibility was to go to the meeting. He got back a half hour late. Ended up being enslaved by the Khmer Rouge for about, for about a year. Somehow managed to survive. And one of the reasons he did, I believe, and I think he believes, is because his mother had always told him, never give up hope. No matter how bad things get, don't ever give up hope. And a bit of advice that she gave him, when you leave, when you leave and try to get to Thailand, which was where he was hoping to be able to escape to, and where he eventually did. Always keep the sun at your back in the morning, and that will guide you as to how to go. Sichan arrived here in Wallingford, as I say, on June 4th of 1976. At that point, he had $2 in his pocket. He was sponsored by Nancy and Bob Charles up on Whirlwind Hill Road. Nancy is here tonight with us. And thank you for sponsoring him. Just in the short time I've had the opportunity, just for the short time I've had knowing him, as far as speaking with him on the phone, and now finally meeting him, a couple of days ago. He's a wonderful man, and you did a great job helping him out. His first job was picking apples at Young's Apple Orchard, which some of you might know that used to be up on South Branford Road. Later became a taxi driver in New York City. And of course, it's a very interesting story as to how he even got that, how he managed to pass that test. But, and then 13 years later, he's up for appointment to be Deputy Assistant to George H.W. Bush. Ended up getting involved in negotiations with then Secretary of State Baker on helping Cambodia. This is during the meetings in Paris in 1989. 2001, George W. Bush appoints him as one of the ambassadors to the United Nations. He gives back to his church. He's active as a deacon in the Presbyterian Church down in San Antonio. He's been a lieutenant colonel in the Civil Air Patrol since, I believe, 1991, is it?
That's correct.
And all this man is about, as far as I am concerned, is giving back. Now, this is something that I believe in very strongly, because this is what we taught in Boy Scouts. Sichan may not have been a Boy Scout, but Sichan sure learned it very well. I have a feeling he might just have learned it from his mother. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sichan Siv, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Bob, for the kind introductions. I also thank the Society and the Trust, as well as the Public Library, for hosting this event. The next 36 minutes, I'm going to take you back and forth between the 18th and the 21st century. So follow me. We are going between the 18th century, where George Washington came here in 1775, and nowadays. So where do I press this little over here? In January 1989, George Bush was sworn in Washington. He raised his right hand, he put his left hand on two Bibles. You see that Barbara Bush was holding two Bibles. One was the family Bible, and the other one was the Bible that George Washington was sworn in 200 years earlier. So we call this the bicentennial of presidential inauguration, from George to George. So 200 years earlier, George Washington did the same thing. He put his left hand on the Bible, which is incidentally a Masonic Bible that belonged to St. John Lodge in New York. They, as you know, everything was first. There has never been an inauguration before, and they didn't know what to do. And suddenly Washington asked, "Where's the Bible?" And somebody ran to the nearby lodge, St. John Lodge, and they got the Masonic Bible. So George Washington raised his right hand, and he repeated after Robert Livingston. the Chancellor of New York. I, George Washington, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and I will faithfully, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And then he added these words, so help me God. So help me God. So 45 men who followed him repeated the same oath. Incidentally, in Germany, when the Chancellor of Germany, Merz, took his oath, he ended with the same word. So mir Gott helfe. So help me God. So 45 men follow him. All of these, there were a lot of lawyers. There were a lot of, a few generals. You can see Washington was the first general to be president, and all the way to Eisenhower. All the way to Eisenhower, you have. Then there's a smaller group. This is a very interesting group. Can you tell how they have, what they have in common? Not for you, Tom and Jim. They are all Freemasons. Yes. And that made me think that the Freemasonry was really playing a key role for the birth of the United States. And even more in Texas, you know, if you know the Alamo, all the leaders in the Alamo who were killed in the siege of the Alamo were all Freemasons. You have Bowie, Bonham, you have Crockett, you have Travis. And also 189 people who were killed there, most of them were Freemason also. And then you have Sam Houston, who defeated Santa Anna in 18 minutes, the shortest battle in the history of mankind. And he was a Freemason. And you have Stephen Austin, whose father was born here in Connecticut. Moses Austin, you go half an hour from here, you'll be in Durham, and there you see the house is still there. Moses actually met Washington when he was 14 years old in 1775, before he moved to Virginia, to Tennessee, and he ended up in San Antonio in 1820. So we're going back to the Freemason, and that is the Society of George Washington in the Grand Lodge of New York, which is amazingly enough one of the best lodges I visit. This is in the St. John lodge room. Of the 45 men who occupied the office, a few smaller number were diplomats. These are top diplomats, they were ambassadors. And I added Franklin there because he was the first diplomat sent to France to convince the French to come and help us out. And it was quite an impossible job, you know. He was there to convince the king, Louis XVI, to defeat another king so that he can have a country without a king. So, but Franklin, he was preceded by a lot of name recognition. You know, they all know by him about the lightning rod and so on and so forth. He was quite popular. So when he got there in 1776, he spent a lot of time doing the French way. You party all night and then you go to work at noon in the following morning. John Adams was sent there after work to help him out, but he was so appalled by the way Franklin led his wife. But John Adams didn't know that how the French socialized in the 18th century. So here you have Adams, who was ambassador to the Netherlands, and Jefferson, who was ambassador to France, followed by Monroe. Monroe was ambassador to France too. But I think the most important appointment here was John Quincy Adams. John Quincy was only 27 years old when Washington appointed him to be ambassador to the Netherlands. And then he was sent to Germany, which was at the time known as Prussia, when he was 28. And he was probably the only ambassador at the time, and maybe afterward, who spoke a few languages. He went with his father, John Adams, when he was 11, 12 years old, and he was acting as his father's secretary. He spoke fluently in French, and then he learned a few other languages. And the last one is George Bush, my former boss. He was ambassador to the United Nations. He was there 30 years before me in 1971. And then he was ambassador to China. The next group of people, they are the people who, you know what they have in common here.
War.
They are on the dollar bill. So you see it every day, you know, pay attention that these people are on the dollar bill. Washington, he has a small book called Rules of Civility. And one of my favorite quotes of Washington was, associate yourself with people of quality, for it is better to be alone than to be in good company. And he put a group of people together. I mean, his first cabinet was 4 cabinet secretaries. He has Jefferson as Secretary of State. Jefferson was still in Paris, so he called him back. He didn't get here until later on. He has Hamilton as Treasury Secretary. He had Henry Knox as Secretary of War, and then Edmund Randolph as Attorney General. So these are the people who fought with him in the Revolutionary War, except for Jefferson. And Hamilton has a particularly interesting story because he was one of the probably only founding father who was not born here. He was born in Nevis, which is a group of St. Kitts and Nevis Island, in the South Island called Nevis, in 1757, I believe. And he was poor. He went to St. Croix to work on a trade issue as a clerk, and he came here. Washington noticed him right away. He was 19 years old, an artillery officer, and he didn't know anything about military strategy. What he did was reading. He read a book about artillery and became an artillery officer. Of all the aides-de-camp, all the system to Washington, I think there were about 30 of them. Hamilton stood out because of his intellect. After that, I did go to where he was born in Nevis. I went to visit his birthplace, and I have a habit of collecting something that I'm there. So what I did was to go to the gift shop and ask them if they have any $10 bill. Of course, you can get $10 bills here, right, in the United States, but not the $10 bill from Nevis, where Hampton was born. So I changed a few $100s, and I put a clean one in my passport, and I forgot. And then a few weeks later, I went to Rome. I got to the airport, I showed my passport, I had a few Italian words, I said a few words, and then he opened the passport, he looked at me, looked very serious, he said, do you know that you have a $10 bill in your passport? And I realized, oh my goodness, I said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. But this is an interesting story. In some countries, you put dollar bills, you get your visa extended. In others, you can go to jail. And I apologized to him, and he gave the passport and a $10 bill back to me. So don't put dollar bill in. So back to the 21st century. This is the Oval Office under George Bush. The world that we knew changed drastically because of the end of the Cold War. And Bush handled the end of the Cold War most effectively without one shot being fired. And I was there organizing a lot of meetings for him so that he could hear directly from the people of important policies and issues that are concerned to him and also to the American people. On the fireplace, there is a painting by Reverend Peale. This is the painting of George Washington as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. As you know, he got the command thanks to John Adams. John Adams was the one who nominated him. And John Hancock, he thought he was going to get the job because he was president of the Continental Congress. But when John Adams, a delegate from Massachusetts, recommended nominated George Washington. The whole room just erupted in applause. But John Hancock was not very happy. But then the nomination was seconded by another Massachusetts guy named Sam Adams. So this painting is quite famous because it's not him as a president. And you see Reverend Peel, he did his father, Charles Wilson Peel, was the first one who painted Washington in 1772. That when Washington was much, much younger. I mentioned a minute ago there are 45 men who occupied the White House. Only 2 of them were pilots. George H.W. Bush in the Navy and his son, George W. Bush, in the Air National Guard. George Bush was shot down in the Pacific on September 2nd, 1944. He was in the water for a few hours before he was spotted by a submarine, USS Finback, and he was rescued. George Bush flew a F-100. If you go to the New England Museum of Art at Hartford, you will see a F-100, which is a Vietnam War area jet. So all the 45 people, a few were diplomats, some were lawyers, 2 were pilots, and only 1 was a skydiver. That's what he said. You learn to sit around drooling in the corner, go out and have some fun. Here back to the Oval Office, for somebody like me, it was quite overwhelming because I was just running for my life. As Bob said, 13 years earlier, and then I was at the White House 13 years after I escaped from the killing fields. And not only that, but the time that George Bush was at the White House was the time that the world changed. The world that we had known no longer existed. Eastern Europe became free, Germany became united, the Soviet Union fell apart, and George Bush handled it most effectively. Last year, it would have been his centennial. So all of us who worked for him went back to the Bush Library in College Station for a reunion. And I want to show you these 2 pictures that follow, which is a reflection, a reference of what George Bush is all about. He brought people together, and he kept people together. The first, the black and white, was in my office in 1989. Only 3 people in that photo who married me, or Bobby Kilberg was looking at me, and then Susan Denston on the right-hand side. The one in color was 35 years later. We were still together. We were still together 35 years after we were at the White House. And that tells a lot about George Bush. So people ask me how did I get to meet George Bush. I mean, he's a refugee from the killing fields that arrived in Wallingford with $2. How did he make it there? And Bob mentioned briefly about it, and I just want to give you some picture. In fact, we met Bush through Reagan. Martha and I, my wife, my late wife Martha, and I were introduced to the Reagans in the 80s in New York. So we got invitation from the White House, and one was an event in the Rose Garden, the one at the bottom, on July 13, 1988. And that was the first time I met George Bush. Until then, our lives seemed to parallel each other. And this is quite an interesting path that we took, but we met. I grew up in Cambodia, which was a French colony, so I grew up speaking French. I didn't know anything about other countries, except everything was from France, or France, and for France. Until 1953, when Vice President Richard Nixon came to visit. Our teachers told us that there was another country, much bigger and farther away than France. It's called United States of America. That was the first time I heard about America. In the spring of 1935, George Bush was ambassador to China, and I was working in Cambodia, like Bob said, in a very dangerous situation, trying to save the lives of hundreds and thousands of people who fled the war-torn countryside. And I was told that if I were to be lifted out of Cambodia when the time came, I had to be at the embassy within 1 hour. And despite the flawlessness of the evacuation by the Ford administration, I missed the helicopter by 30 minutes. So the Khmerus came in and he turned the country upside down. A year later, on February 13, 1936, George Bush has been director of the CIA for 13 days. I was alone at the back of the timber truck. I jumped off that truck and I walked. I was severely wounded when I fell in a booby trap. I walked for 3 days having nothing to eat or nothing to drink through the jungle, nothing to guide me except the sun, the stars, and the moon. When I got to Thailand, completely exhausted, I spent a few months teaching English to fellow refugees. They suffered severe mental depression because they sat down all day feeling sorry about the past and worrying about the future. So I organized English classes, which is a win-win proposal. Many of them were going to go to an English-speaking country. They were able to get some English, and they were able to take their minds off the sorrows and the worries. On June 4th, 1976, as Bob mentioned, I arrived in Wallingford, Connecticut, birthplace of my freedom, at the home of Bob and Nancy Charles, 1742, building 42. I pick apples here, and I walk in front of Jim's house every morning when I went to pick apples. And then I went to New York to drive a taxi. In New York in 1977, you needed to know where you were going to drive a taxi. You need strong horn and good brakes. Let's go back to the 15th century, to France. This is a chateau in Chavagnac. It's about 6 hours southwest of Paris. Here on September 6, 1757, was born a boy named Marie-Joseph Paul-Yves Roche Gilbert de Moutier, also known as Lafayette. Lafayette was born into a very, very wealthy family, and he was groomed to be the leader from the very beginning. I mean, his father died when he was like 2 years old, so he inherited the title and everything. Lafayette was born here in Chavagnac, and in a minute you hear how strong the connection is. In Chavagnac, there was a United States flag flown over the Capitol on July 4th, 2005. Draped over the staircase, you know, you went upstairs to the room where he was born. You see that enormous flag. It was a gift from the U.S. Congress. There was a certificate of authenticity, except that they misspelled Lafayette's name. You know, Lafayette has like 40 cities and counties and a mountain named for him here in the United States, and the U.S. Congress misspelled his name without an E. And here in the United States, you have Mount Vernon. I mean, if you want to know about Washington, there is no better place to go to Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon, he has a room on the second floor. They gave it to him, called Lafayette Room on the left. And he gave Washington a key to the Bastille. That's when the revolution started. And he had one of the most distinguished careers in human history that I've known of. And I'm a big fan of history. He came here in 1824 for what he called the America's Farewell Tour. He arrived on August 14 in New Jersey, and he visited all the 24 states. At the time, he went all the way to Mobile, Alabama. Mobile was the largest French-speaking town at the time. You know about Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras was actually born in founded in Mobile, and then New Orleans sort of took over. And he came to New England everywhere. He went to Quincy to meet John Adams. He went to Monticello to see Thomas Jefferson. All these people were his comrades, but brothers in arms. In a parade in Richmond, he stood up from his carriage and he recognized a black man. His name was James Armistead. He was the first spy that Lafayette sent to spy on the bridge before the Yorktown. They recognized each other. He got off the carriage and he ran to James Armistead. They hugged each other, and that's quite amazing, that he remembered all of this. And James Armistead, he took his name, later he changed his name to James Armistead Lafayette. It's just like the oldest son of Lafayette is called George Washington Lafayette. There was a quote from one of the stepdaughters of Washington. She wrote to him, except that they misspelled George Washington Lafayette. George in French, there is no S at the end. George in English, there is no S. But anyway, he died. He went back to France. He got caught up in the French Revolution. He died, and he's buried at Picpus Cemetery, which is next to this mass grave of about 1,300 people who were killed, guillotined during the French Revolution. And I went there, I paid my respect, and I just reflected on the blessings. And because I'm Francophone and Francophile, I could associate myself with Lafayette very well, who said, when he came here in 1777, that when I heard of America, I love her. The opportunity that I have to serve, America, that would be the best and the most happy moment of my life. He came, he bought a ship himself called La Victoire, which is the Victory in English. He spent like 100,000 pounds to buy that ship, and the king didn't want him to come. They tried to stop him, but he already left. So he came to Charleston. He wrote, he got sick on the sea, and he rode the horse a few weeks to get to Philadelphia to meet Washington, and they just hit it off. Yeah, Hamilton was already moving on, and so Washington having no child, and then this young man, 19-year-old, very, very patriotic. They got a letter from Franklin. They said, treat him very well. He knows a lot of people, but don't get him killed. Make sure he earns his stars. So if I were going to live in another period of my life, it would be with Lafayette and Washington. So my fantasy is that because Washington didn't speak French, he called on me to be with him and Lafayette. And that I would be one of the 30 aide-de-camps. But they, in 1931, when they commemorated the 150th anniversary of the Yorktown campaign, they only put two French there. Rochambeau, he was a general already, and Rochambeau was at Yorktown when the British surrendered. And de Grasse, Admiral de Grasse was the one who brought the French Navy from the Caribbean and blockaded Lord Cornwallis, the British Navy. They couldn't get out. Back to the 21st century, after George W. Bush was elected, he asked me to go and work at the United Nations to represent the United States and American people. And that was a special moment for me because I was not even born in the United States. And now I'm speaking on behalf of the President and the people of the United States. And that was my proudest moment. It's an honor beyond measure to be working for two presidents named Bush. They say I work behind the bushes. And then back to Rembrandt Peale. This is the White House Oval Office of George W. Bush. That Martha and I were there, and at the bottom, those are the two Peale paintings of Martha Washington and George Washington. That was the first time I saw the two paintings together. And of course, I immediately inserted myself. 21st century, another moment that changed our life in the 21st century was 9/11. And Connecticut, you know it or not, there has a connection to that event. This is a plane in the morning of 9/11, there were some 4,500 planes in the skies. All of them were ordered to land within a few hours, except this plane, 4 Lima, which belonged to the Civil Air Patrol wing in New York. It was made in Islip at the time. And you probably remember this photo, Andy Card, the chief of staff who whispered into George W. Bush's ear, a second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. George Bush was listening to elementary school students reading, and he didn't want to panic the children. He stayed until the reading was over. Then he gave an address to the nation. He left. He wanted to go back to Washington, but it was not safe, so he was told to go to Barksdale in Louisiana. That's a B-52 base. There he gave an address to the nation, and he went from Barksdale to Offutt in Omaha, near Omaha, another B-52 base. And finally he got to Washington in the evening, where he gave another address to the nation in the evening from the Oval Office. So that was 9/11. Here in Brainerd Airport, the plane 44 Lima was transferred from New York to Connecticut. I'm pleased that the wing commander of Connecticut is here, Colonel LaPlante. Can you raise your hand? Yes, wing. Civil Patrol was started on December 1st, which happened to be Martha's birthday. The week before Pearl Harbor attack, their original mission was search and rescue, cadet program, and aerospace education. But the mission now expanded to counter drug, to water protection, and natural disaster, and so on and so forth. So this plane was transferred to Connecticut. And I saw that painting somewhere in Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. And I said, I want to fly that plane because I want to honor George H.W. Bush on his centennial. So Jim Ridley, who was the regional of the Northeast region, invited me to come here, and Major Prue and I took off from Brainerd, and we flew first over Groton, because this was the first plane that escorted submarine from Groton into the high sea. And this is Groton from the air. Then we flew for 3 hours to Rhode Island, to New York, along the Long Island coast, and back to New York and Massachusetts. But we did land in New Haven, and that was the airport where I landed in 1976 with $2 in my pocket. I am very fond of the Civil Air Patrol. I've been a member since 1991. And recently I went to Florida, and I met with a lot of cadets and a major. And Lila, if I may recognize you, Lila flew all the way from Florida to be with us, and she was the person of the year. Beside all these missions, it's the largest youth development organization in the country, by leadership, character, vision, and so on and so forth. So this is Sarasota. That is where George Bush was on 9/11. I flew there with another pilot, Major Hoffman, it was emotional for us because the two of us knew exactly where we were. Major Hoffman was in Korea in the middle of the night when he learned that what happened in New York in 9/11. And that was sort of closing the loop in terms of service to others. And now I'm back with Lafayette and George Washington. When I travel around the world, I try to find a place where I can connect for Freemasonry, because both Lafayette and Washington were Freemason. And a few weeks ago I was in Salzburg, and I went to see the birthplace of Mozart. Mozart, as you know, was one of the most prolific composers in our history. And this is a description of Mozart from another Mason, Goethe. You know, Goethe, the writer, he said, a phenomenon such as Mozart always remains a miracle that cannot be explained further. And that from a Mason to another Mason. In Paris, you can find both Lafayette and Washington, with Park Jefferson, plus Dizzy Dazini, in Paris, and that they were the two together. And of course, there is a big statue of Washington at Place Vienna in Paris, and then another one of Franklin. I cannot tell enough about Franklin, how popular he was in France. Each time I'm there, I usually try to walk to Passy, where he used to live. And there's a marker there by the house, and there was a quote from one of his friends, lady friends. She said in French, "Ici, à Passy, on s'amuse." Here in Passy, we have fun. And I mentioned a moment ago, I mean, Franklin, he knew how to operate in Paris, in the Parisian. That's why he was able to convince the French to help us out, especially after Saratoga. After Saratoga, October 1677, when General Horatio Gates defeated Burgoyne, the French was ready to help. Because Louis XVI, he was leading to help us, but he wanted to have some kind of proof. And of course, in 1780, Lafayette went back to France, and he came back to tell George Washington that the French are going to send military and financial assistance, and a year later, we won the war in Yorktown. So I want to thank you very much for having me, and this is one of my favorite verses. I was a stranger, and you took me in, Matthew 25, 35. We all know that behind a good man stand a good woman, right? In Texas, we say, beside a good man stand a great Texan librarian. The Martha was a librarian. She went to UT, got a Master of Library Information Science, and she said, I want to see the world. So she went to Paris, she got a job at the United Nations in Bangkok. So at that time, she and I were a few miles from each other. She was in Thailand, I was in Cambodia, but we didn't meet until later. So God bless you and God bless America. And I want to dedicate this to Wallingford and Connecticut, and also to the Bushes and to Martha. Thank you very much.